Hello, how are you, fellow Ugandan? My name is Vikan Chulika, the Ugandan apologist. I'm going to talk about a particular topic that is of concern to every citizen in the country, and that is about torture. And we shall use a case study of Kakwenza, Rukira, and the government of Uganda. And the question is, who is the bad guy? Is it Kakwenza or is it government of Uganda? Now, what you're going to listen to, what you're going to hear, will help you decide who the bad guy is. Now, let me cut to the chase. One thing I'm going to say is both Kakwenza and the government of Uganda are the bad guy. I've told you that straight ahead so that you understand what I'm going to be talking about, which means that if you are someone who is not comfortable with the brutal truth, if you're someone who is not comfortable with honesty, please don't listen to this thing. If you're someone who is comfortable with being politically correct, this is not for you. If you're someone who thinks I'm going to say that Kakwenza is innocent, please do not listen to this. If you're someone who thinks I'm going to say government is innocent, please do not listen to this. On the other hand, if you're somebody who is comfortable with honesty and the brutal truth, if you're comfortable with going beyond common sense, then please go ahead and listen to this. But before we go ahead, first and foremost, let's define aggression. What is aggression? Aggression is a social activity which has numerous causes and is expressed differently. Briefly, the different forms of aggression include physical aggression, like as we have seen pictures of tortured Ugandans who have been beaten up. Now that is physical aggression. Or it can be verbal aggression, for example, shouting abuse, right? So it's very important to note that there are two forms of aggression you have to think about. You have to think about physical aggression, you have to think about verbal aggression, which is why I'm saying Kakwenza is guilty. He's a bad guy because he was giving out verbal aggression. I'll explain that as we further go on, and which is why I also say the government of Uganda or its agents are also the bad guy because they met out physical aggression. Now, aggression can be direct, it can be indirect. Direct aggression is like maybe someone is retaliating against a co-worker. Indirect aggression is usually about inflicting reputational harm, for example, spreading rumors about someone. Aggression can, of course, be spontaneous, it can be prompted by anger, it can be planned, it can be unplanned, it can be employed to accomplish other goals. Physically violent aggression is referred to as violence, but despite the differences of the different types of aggression, they all basically come down to one thing, whether it's physical violation or verbal aggression, or whether it is intended or not. Aggression basically intends to cause harm to another person. That is the simple truth about it. And irrespective of which political party you belong to, irrespective of what your beliefs are, aggression is aggression. And now that we have defined aggression, let's talk about being assertive and being aggressive. Let's talk about fighting for your rights and actually being abusive. These are two different things. If someone is trying to manipulate you, if someone is trying to take away your rights, you definitely have a responsibility as an individual, as a community, to fight for your freedom, to fight for your rights. Now, the best way to do that is by being assertive, which is different from being aggressive. Now, if in the case of government of Uganda, if you have elements in your population that are not towing the line, that are criminals in whatever form, then you can be assertive by working through courts of law and other instruments of justice. You do not have to go on and become physically aggressive unnecessarily. And if you have somebody already in detention, why should you go ahead and beat them up? It does not make any sense. There are other better ways of actually getting information from them without necessarily beating them up. You have social scientists in Uganda, you have psychologists in Uganda, you have all those kinds of experts, Ugandans. They should be able to help the forces or the military or the police or whatever to get information. You have criminologists in Uganda. They should be able to help you get information out of the people you detain without exposing them to unnecessary aggression, without exposing them to physical torture. Now, that would be an assertive form of dealing with what you call wrong elements. On the other hand, as well, if you are an opposition member, because the current thing, let's be honest, is about opposition members are being taken in by government and tortured. If you're an opposition member and you're fighting for your rights, you do not have to be verbally aggressive. You do not have to do any of that verbal aggression. You can speak out. You should speak out. It is your right. But there is a difference between assertive verbal communication and aggressive verbal communication. I'll use examples of Africans here. Okot Pibitek is a famous Ugandan, a creative writer who used a lot of poetry, who used his poetry, who used the written language, who used oral language to speak out against what he saw as injustices in society at that time. His main thing was especially about colonialism. It was also about bad governance. In fact, he got into exile for writing the Song of Lawino. It got him into exile. But when you look at the context of his writing, they're quite brutal. They're quite honest. He talks about buttocks. He talks about so many things, but he is assertive. He's not abusive. His verbal stuff is not abusive. Another example to look at would be Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the Kenyan. If you read Ngugi's books, he was also in the struggle for the freedom of Kenya. If you read his books got him into trouble with the authorities. But if you read his books, much as they're brutally honest, they are not verbally abusive. The other example I can give is the play by Alex Mukulu, 30 Years of Bananas. Bro, if you look at 30 Years of Bananas, if you've watched that play or read it, wow, it's brutally honest, but again, it's not verbally abusive. It's assertive, but it's verbally assertive, but it's not aggressive. So the short and sweet of it is, if you're fighting for your rights, because you're fighting and calling the other person the oppressor, you don't have to become the new oppressor yourself, because the mistake we always make is assuming that people who are aggressive physically are the bad guys, while people who are verbally aggressive, they are the good guys. But no, it's all the same kind of thing. It's all being aggressive. It doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. Again, let me give another example or a definition of verbal aggression from Albert Ellis. Albert Ellis is one of the forefront psychologists of this era, of our era, of the modern era. And I'm reading his book here. It is called The Secret of Overcoming Verbal Abuse, and the subtitle is Getting Off the Emotional Roller Coaster and Regaining Control of Your Life. He wrote it with Marcia Grad Powers. You might be interested actually in reading that book. It's called The Secret of Overcoming Verbal Abuse by Albert Ellis. And I want to read out something from this book. This particular issue I have, this is on page 14. And where is it? Let me see, just a minute. Albert Ellis talks about verbal abuse this way. The person who is verbally abusive does not raise issues to resolve them or to give you helpful advice for your own good, or to accomplish any other positive goal. This person's hurtful statements and behavior help him feel his need to feel powerful and to establish control over you. You're focusing on the individual issues causes you to miss the obvious. The issues are not the problem. Verbal abuse is the problem. Let me read this again. That being verbally abusive is when someone does not raise issues to resolve them, or to give you helpful advice for your own good, or to accomplish any other positive goal. Instead, statements and behavior of verbal abuse help this person feel his need to feel powerful and to establish control over you. And what happens with people who are verbally abusive, generally speaking, they can come off as angels, they can come off as assertive, they will tell you, it is my freedom of speech, it is my this and that and that. But when you try to demean someone, you're actually abusing them verbally. In fact, the Wikipedia definition of verbal abuse is, Wikipedia says verbal abuse is also known as verbal aggression, a verbal attack, a verbal violence, verbal assault, or psychic aggression or psychic violence. It is a type of psychological or mental abuse that involves the use of oral language, gestured language, and written language directed to a victim. Verbal abuse can include the act of harassing, labeling, insulting, scolding, rebuking, excessive yelling towards an individual. It can also include use of derogatory terms. Basically, verbal abuse, the key thing I want to take here from the Wikipedia definition of verbal abuse is psychic violence. We talk very much about physical torture and how it can mess you up mentally, which is true. But no one wants to talk about the psychic violence, the mental messing up that verbal abuse can actually do to you. Actually, any form of aggression is definitely not good for anybody. So if the government is using torture as a form of aggression, it's not good. If the people who are calling themselves freedom fighters are using verbal abuse, it's not good either, because it doesn't make sense. It really does not make sense. When we tie this in with what we are having currently in Uganda as far as the social media wars of politics are concerned, there is a lot of verbal abuse, but no one is talking about that, or no one is actually understanding the gravity of the situation we are having as a country. Some sections of Ugandans are like, no, you have to abuse these people. You have to abuse the people you are fighting against, whether it is opposition verbally abusing the NRM or NRM verbally abusing the opposition. There's this thing, no, you have to verbally abuse them, and it's mistaken as freedom of speech. It's mistaken as being clever or intelligent, which in reality is a lot of bullshit. And there's a couple of reasons why this is not good for us as a community. But before we go into that, let me again point you to the red flags of what verbal abuse is, and you compare, as I point these red flags out, compare them to what you see in the online arguments we have as Ugandans today, and see, is it really reasoning? Are we trying to reason with each other, or are we actually trying to verbally abuse each other? Are we being aggressive towards each other, right? And this is something I'm getting from healthline.com. And it is, the title of this article I'm reading now is What is Verbal Abuse? How to Recognize Abusive Behavior and What to Do Next. It goes on to tell you, this particular article from healthline.com, that abuse comes in many forms, not all of which are physical. When someone repeatedly uses words to demean, frighten, or control someone, it's considered verbal abuse. Now, you'll agree with me that we have developed this knack as Ugandans. We have developed this knack of using social media to demean others when they bring up an issue we don't agree with, to frighten others, to try to control them. That's verbal abuse, my friend, my dear Ugandan, my fellow Ugandan. You're likely to hear about verbal abuse in the context of a romantic relationship or a parent-child relationship, but it can also occur in other relationships, socially, or on the job. Verbal and emotional abuse takes a toll. It can sometimes escalate into physical abuse too. This is all from healthline.com. Now, here's the thing. What is the difference between verbal abuse and a normal argument? Because as a country, as citizens, as Ugandans, we are bound to get into arguments. We are bound not to agree on specific issues, and that is normal, that is healthy. Not two people will always agree on the same thing, and you try to talk to each other to get a common ground, right? And that is a normal argument, which is different from verbal abuse. I've talked before about being assertive and being aggressive, so a normal argument, that is being verbally assertive. Verbal abuse, well, that is being verbally aggressive, right? So again, I'm going to read directly from this article, and it says, we all get into arguments from time to time. Sometimes we lose our cool and yell. It's all part of being human, but verbal abuse is not normal. The trouble is, when you're involved in a verbally abusive relationship, it can wear you down and seem normal to you. Now, when I'm talking about relationship, think of relationship from all angles, father to mother, son to child, son to dad, teacher to student, boss to subordinates, Ugandan opposition to NRM, NRM to Ugandan opposition. Think of relationships from that kind of stuff, right? So I continue reading from this healthline.com article, and they say here are some examples of what a normal disagreement looks like, or what I will call assertive communication, assertive verbal argument. They do not dissolve into name calling or personal attacks. That is normal. They don't happen every day. Arguments revolve around a basic issue. They are not character assassinations. You listen and try to understand the other person's position, even when you're angry. One of you may yell or say something truly awful out of frustration, but it's an unusual occurrence and you work through it together. Even if you cannot agree completely, you're able to compromise or move on without punishments or threats. Arguments are not a zero-sum game. One person will not win at the detriment of the other. So a normal argument or assertive verbal communication does not involve name calling, does not involve personal attacks. It doesn't happen every day. It's around a basic issue. There is no character assassination. You listen and try to understand each other's position, even when you're angry. Even when you yell or say something truly awful, it's not like all the time it happens. If you don't agree, you compromise, and it's not about arguments being a zero-sum game, as in there must be a winner and loser. It's not about one person winning at the detriment of the other, which is needed for nation building, because we are all citizens of the same nation. So what use is it if I win and you lose? Doesn't make sense, right? We have to win in some ways, yeah? Now, here are the red flags according to this article. Consider it a red flag when the other person engages in this behavior. So here is what verbal abuse looks like. And again, as I read this out, compare them to what, let me be honest, compare them to what Kakwenza has been writing on his Twitter accounts. I don't know any other social accounts he has been on. I don't know, but if you've been following Kakwenza on Twitter and you look at what he's been writing, all of these red flags apply to what Kakwenza was writing, which is why I said in the first place, Kakwenza is as bad a guy as the government of Uganda that tortured him. They're both bad guys, and we don't need that kind of stuff in Uganda. We don't need physical torture from government of Uganda as citizens of Uganda. We don't need verbal abuse from citizens of Uganda as government of Uganda. Yeah, so these are the red flags, and not as I read them out for you, don't only think of Kakwenza's writing, but think of how we are engaging each other on social media, or even outside social media as Ugandans, when it comes to politics, when it comes to even issues outside politics. So these are the red flags of verbal abuse. They insult or attempt to humiliate you. I'm reading from this article, the healthline.com article. So they insult or attempt to humiliate you. Then they accuse you of being sensitive, or say that it was a joke and you have no sense of humor. They frequently yell or scream at you. Arguments take you by surprise, but you get blamed for starting them. The initial disagreement sets off a string of accusations and dredging up of unrelated issues to put you on the defense. In this case, initial disagreement, let us say you're talking about hospital beds, and someone says that there are not enough hospital beds in Uganda. That's the initial disagreement. And another person is saying we have enough beds in Uganda because here's the evidence, A, B, C, D. Now, when you bring out the evidence, what usually happens with our Ugandan politics online is that when somebody makes a claim, let's say the opposition makes a claim and says this is not correct, and then the NRM rebuts it and gives evidence, or the opposite, if the NRM makes a claim and then the opposition gives evidence of why that is not correct, or just as we go about our usual online activity, what happens is you start off with, like I've said, there is this one thing of, this thing says the initial disagreement sets off a string of accusations and dredging up of unrelated issues to put you on the defense. So let's say opposition says there are not enough beds in Uganda, hospital beds. And somebody from the other side says, actually, there are enough hospital beds. Here is the data, blah, 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 blah. Now, the next thing you're going to see is someone is saying, but you people are corrupt. And you're like, but you said there are not enough beds, and I've shown you the enough beds. So why you bring corruption into this issue? If you want to bring corruption, start a different thread, talk about it differently. And then they will accuse you of being sensitive, right? They will now try to humiliate you and say, you see, you're stupid, you're a dunce, you don't understand. And some people even go tribal. In my case, people have even mentioned and said, oh, for you, because you're this tribe, they don't even know what my tribe is or what my ethnicity is. But they automatically say, if you say supporting a government position, they automatically say, for you're a Westerner. If you put supporting an opposition position, they say that one is a Uganda, which is quite stupid. Anyway, let me continue reading again from this same article. So the other red flags as they try to make you feel guilty and position themselves as the victim. So they abuse you and then they try to make you feel guilty and they call themselves the victims, but they're the ones abusing you. Now, they save the hurtful behaviors for when you're alone, but act completely different when others are around. That one we shall leave it out for now. That mostly occurs in private relationships. The other red flag is they get into your personal space or block you from moving away. Again, this is in private relationships anyway. So these are the red flags. These are the red flags. Let me repeat the red flags quickly again. They insult or attempt to humiliate you. They accuse you of being overly sensitive or say it was a joke and you have no sense of humor. Arguments take you by surprise, but you get blamed for starting them. Initial disagreements set off a string of accusations and bringing up of unrelated matters to put you on the defensive. They try to make you feel guilty and they make themselves the victims when actually they are aggressive themselves. Now, why am I telling you all these things? People have talked of, some Ugandans have spoken of bringing hygiene into our politics, bringing hygiene into the way we engage with each other. We have this thing of Ubuntu Bulamu. This is a concept we have across Uganda, across most of Africa. Ubuntu Bulamu is about being assertive without being aggressive, without hurting the other. I think the challenge we have is that we assume that fighting back means you have to hurt other people. No, when you have to fight back, you have to fight back, but you can't fight back without demeaning the other person, without taking away the dignity of the other person, irrespective of how this person has treated you in the past or was treating you. You can actually fight back without taking away their dignity. If it means that you have to get into a physical fight with them, yes, get into a physical fight with them, that definitely hurts. But after giving them a knockout punch, why should you go ahead and take their clothes off and drag them in the road? That's demeaning. You've defended yourself, they're down on the ground, tie them up and take them to the police. If you want to speak out about something you don't agree with from government, talk about it. You can even be sarcastic. Those are art forms. Those are forms of language. I've given you examples of Okot, Pibitek, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, 30 Years of Bananas. These guys use verbal language in very interesting ways, but they are not abusive. They are just assertive. I don't know if it makes sense, but at the end of the day, we don't have to hide behind human right of so-called freedom of speech to be aggressive towards others, because what happens is that if we are aggressive towards others, it becomes the national psyche. We are hurting each other. We are not helping each other, really. And it's going to go from politics, it's going to pour into our homes, it's going to pour into our offices. We are going to have, if we are to let it go and be like, okay, because we have freedom of speech, you can say whatever you want, you can be verbally abusive, you are going to have bullying in the workplace, for example. You're going to have bullying in schools, and people will say, oh, it is my right to, it's my freedom of speech, which is a whole lot of nonsense. We have to rethink these things. The unfortunate thing is that most of us have been convinced that our ways, our culture, our traditions are inferior to European culture. So there's this assumption of freedom of speech, meaning being abusive, and we are bringing the same thing here, forgetting our own tradition of Ubuntu Uramu, being calm. And now this is the other funny thing about being abusive or being aggressive, whether verbally or physically. This is the other problem with being aggressive. When you're aggressive, your rational brain, your thinking brain is short-circuited. It's messed up. You no longer think logically. You no longer think logically. You now think irrationally. It's all about survival. That is how our biology is designed. You're being irrational. It's all about survival. And when you're irrational, you're not going to do anything useful. You're going to do stupid things. So when we encourage aggression in any form as a country, as citizens, whether it's from the government of Uganda via physical torture by its agents or by people like Kakwenza Rukira who call themselves freedom fighters, but then they're verbally aggressive, whichever form of aggression we are encouraging, when that becomes our psyche, we are simply going to become irrational when we are dealing with serious issues. And most of the issues we are dealing with are national issues, and nationals are issues which are quite important to all of us, which make a lot of sense to all of us. We need cool heads, we need logic, we need reason to be able to discuss these issues so that everybody benefits. But when we are abusive to each other, like I've said, biologically, we are simply going to become irrational. We are going to be thinking of survival. And when you're thinking of survival, you only make short-term decisions. You only think of today. You do not think about tomorrow. And here is what happens. Some people might be like, if we do this, then the government will fall and we shall take power. Okay, it's your choice to make the government fall and take power. The question is, what kind of national psyche are you building? What kind of national psyche are you going to find when you take power? If every Ugandan psyche is about being aggressive, verbally, physically, when you get power yourself tomorrow, people are going to keep on doing the same things to you that you've been doing to others, or that others have been doing to you. And what happens, actually, what I'm seeing nowadays is people get all sorts of stupid accusations about government. So it's all about putting out fires. The people accusing government, they think, oh, we are winning. But here's the problem. You're actually not winning. What is happening is you're stopping the officials in government from actually being rational. You're stopping them from being rational. They are being irrational because you're also being irrational. So the decisions they're going to make are simply going to be stupid. That might be, like I've said, a technique for you to get the population disgusted with the current movement and get it out of power, yes. But unfortunately, that is a very bad, I would say it's not a patriotic mechanism of getting into power, because if your way of getting into power is to make people who make decisions irrational, how patriotic are you? Because at the end of the day, every citizen suffers. Now, you might say I'm being so much on the side of government. I mean, there's nothing wrong with somebody supporting government or your position. So please don't tell me, oh, government is brutal, blah, 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 blah. And finally, this is the one thing you should remember, that I'm talking about brutality. I'm talking about aggression here, right? I'm talking about aggression. So don't bring up this argument of being aggressive, verbally aggressive, and start telling me about the economics of are not good, there is corruption. I'm not talking about corruption. I'm not talking about economics. I'm not talking about schools. I'm not talking about the health sector. I'm talking about aggression. That is the only point I'm talking about today. So please, if you want to tell me about there is corruption, there is that, that's nonsense. I don't want to listen it. Please go away. Anyway, in conclusion, as citizens of Uganda, what we have to think about is we don't want to be aggressive towards each other. We have to be assertive, we have to stand up for our rights, but it does not mean that we have to be aggressive. And irrespective of where the aggression is coming from, irrespective of whether that aggression is physical or verbal, irrespective of whether it's coming from opposition or government, we should not stand for that kind of aggression as a country. And that's all I had for you. I hope it makes a little bit of sense, and have a good day. So in conclusion again, Kakwenza is a bad guy as far as being verbally aggressive is concerned. Government of Uganda is a bad guy as far as physical torture of Kakwenza is concerned. So we don't have good guys here in this thing. Kakwenza and GOU, as far as aggression is concerned, they're both bad guys, and we have to condemn it. I'm not saying Kakwenza should have been physically tortured. No, that is wrong. Neither am I saying that Kakwenza, because he was physically tortured, has a right to be verbally aggressive. I mean, it's his choice or anybody's choice to be aggressive, but it is not the right thing. It's not the right thing to do in a normal society, and we should be a normal society. We shouldn't strive for perfection, but we are a normal society. Have a good day. Take care. Bye for now.